welcome to Chore Chapters, because everyday tasks need good company. I'm Leo, and with me as always, we have got Luna.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a thrilling and interesting story lined up, so grab your headphones and let's dive straight into the story.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine this. A seemingly ordinary family dinner celebrating a son's college graduation in a quiet Texas suburb, December 10th, 2003.
But it wasn't ordinary at all. That night in Sugar Land, Texas, things just shattered. The mother, Patricia, and the younger son, Kevin, they were killed.
And the father, Kent, and the older son, Thomas Bartlett Whitaker Bart, everyone called him they were wounded.
Yeah, and on the surface, it looked like a really brutal home invasion. Just a random act of terror striking this family.
But investigators pretty quickly started to see something else, something far more calculated, right? Way more disturbing.
Exactly. This wasn't some stranger breaking in. The violence, it was a betrayal orchestrated from inside the family.
And the architect was Bart Whitaker, the son who, initially looked like just another victim to everyone, to the first responders.
Absolutely.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really take you through the layers of this extraordinary case. We're using the court documents, the news reports, all the source materials you shared.
Right, to piece together exactly what happened.
We'll trace it from the crime scene through the investigation that just peeled back all these layers of lies.
The trial, the appeals, which went all the way up.
And then that ending, the commutation,
Yeah.
which was, really real and surprising.
Totally unexpected for many.
We're going to stick strictly to the facts and the sources, focusing on those key moments and, frankly, the shocking details.
It's a story about, intense deception, finding clues in unexpected places, how the legal system works in these high-stakes cases.
And that incredible journey of the father, Kent, towards forgiveness, which actually played a huge part in the end.
A decisive part, arguably.
So let's dive in. How did this terrible night actually unfold? The sources say Bart had this huge secret. He wasn't graduating college at all.
No, not even close. He was a freshman at Sam Houston State, and he was actually on academic probation.
But he kept the lie going, got the family to take him out for this big celebratory dinner that night.
Right, the whole charade, they have this, seemingly happy dinner. He even gets an expensive watch as a graduation present.
Wow.
Then they head home, completely unaware, obviously, of what's waiting inside. As they walk in the front door, there's a shooter hiding in the house.
And the order they went in, that became really crucial, didn't it?
Absolutely critical. Kevin, the younger brother, he walks in first, shot in the chest.
Oh, God.
Patricia, the mom, she's right behind him.
Yeah.
Also shot in the chest.
And Kent.
Kent, the father, hears the shots, rushes in, and he gets hit in the shoulder.
But Bart, his entrance was different.
Completely different. He was last. And according to the plan he'd made, he stages this struggle with the shooter, gets shot in the arm, exactly as planned.
All just to make him look like another victim.
Precisely. Part of the whole staged home invasion narrative.
And the scene when help arrived, it seemed to confirm that story initially.
Yeah, the neighbor, Cliff Stanley, he got there first. He found Kevin, already deceased. Patricia was alive, but barely. She managed to say, "He shot us."
But didn't say who.
No identification. Those were her last words, basically. Kent was outside, bleeding, and Bart was inside, playing the injured victim.
So when first responders got there, chaos.
Total chaos. Patricia died later at the hospital. Kent and Bart survived. And Bart, right away, starts feeding them bad information.
The description of the shooter.
Yep. Told them the gunman was black. A specific lie designed to throw the police off the scent, protect his friend, who was the actual shooter. A lie from minute one.
So Detective Marshall Slott starts investigating. Initially, he's thinking maybe a burglary gone wrong.
That was the initial theory. And Bart and Kent, they both seemed angry, wanting the killer caught.
Yeah.
Bart kept up the story, told Slott he'd graduated from SHSU.
But that didn't last long. The college check, that was the first crack.
Exactly. A simple phone call. Sam Houston State says, nope, he's not enrolled. He's a freshman on academic probation.
And Bart's explanation?
When confronted, he just said, he didn't want to disappoint his family. That was the first really big red flag for Detective Slott. Something wasn't right here.
And then came the bombshell, the friend stepping forward.
Yeah, this is where the case just breaks wide open. 5 days after the shooting, this old friend of Bart's, Adam Hipp, contacts Detective Slott.
And tells him what?
He tells him about a previous plot, years earlier. Bart had approached him, Adam Hip, with a really detailed plan to murder his entire family.
Wow. And the
It
details.
was chillingly similar. Hip was supposed to be the shooter, hiding inside, killing them as they came in, just like what happened.
And the part about Bart getting shot.
That was in the plan, too. Hip was supposed to shoot Bart in the shoulder, make it look like a burglary, make Bart look innocent. Slot recognized it immediately. The exact blueprint, he called it.
That must have just completely shifted the focus right onto Bart.
Instantly, suspicion zeroed in on him. And when Bart agreed to do a walkthrough of the events at the house,
He was vague.
very vague, didn't add up, deepened Slot's suspicions even more. Meanwhile, you have Kent, the father, just reeling from grief, struggling to even consider his son could be involved.
You didn't want to believe it.
Understandably, he was apparently clinging to Bart's promises, his, perceived love for the family.
So, based on Hip's story about prior plots, the investigation turns to Bart's friends.
Right. Slot starts looking closely at Chris Brashear and Stephen Champagne, guys Bart knew, worked with.
And physical evidence started connecting them.
Yes, this is where forensics came in big time. They use scent dogs. The dogs linked Brashear's scent to places like drawers that were moved in the staged burglary.
Okay.
And, crucially, the dogs linked Brashear directly to the murder weapon.
Which was?
It was the Whitaker's own gun, taken from a gun safe that had been pried open, just as Bart had planned.
And Brashear's reaction when they confronted him with that scent evidence.
The report just says, horror, panic. It pretty much confirmed for investigators they'd found their shooter.
But even with the net closing in, Bart didn't stick around.
No, he bolted. About 7 months after the murders, he tells his dad he's just going out for a bit and disappears.
And took money.
Yeah, the sources say he stole about $10,000 from his dad right before he fled.
Where did he go?
He fled the country, went down to Mexico, ended up in a small town, Cerralvo.
And started a new life?
Completely. New identity, Rudy Rios.
Yeah.
Used the stolen money, got a job at a furniture store. The store was owned by the family of his new girlfriend, Cindy Lou Salinas.
And kept up the act down there, too?
Well, yeah. Described as friendly, charming. But he told wild lies. Said his shoulder scar was from fighting in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan? Seriously?
Yep. Claimed he was the only child. Parents ignored him, just gave him money. Even made up this horrific story that his mother was a prostitute.
That's unbelievable.
And the girlfriend's family, the Salinas family, they apparently treated him like one of their own, which Bart reportedly said was something he'd never had. More manipulation.
So how did this whole Mexico chapter end? How did they catch him?
Well, it lasted about 14 months. The break came from the real Rudy Rios.
Ah, the guy whose Mamie took.
Exactly. This guy had worked with Bart back in Houston, actually helped him get to Mexico for like $3,000. When the real Rudy heard there was a reward out for Bart,
He called the police.
he did. That led Mexican authorities to pick Bart up on immigration charges in September 2005. Then they handed him over to the U.S. at the border.
And back in Texas, his father went to see him.
Kent visited him in jail. And according to the sources, Bart said to him, "Dad, I'm just so sorry and so sorry for all of it. It's all my fault."
And Kent took that as an admission.
Kent understood it as Bart finally taking responsibility for murdering his mother and brother.
So, with Bart back, the case moves to trial. What was the prosecution's main argument for motive?
The prosecutors, Jeff Strange and Fred Felkman, they focused heavily on money. Bart stood to inherit around $1.5 million.
Okay, the inheritance.
Right. But also this idea that Bart thought he was smarter than everyone, that he could plan and execute the perfect crime and just get away with it. Felkman used some pretty strong language.
Yeah.
Called him potentially a sociopath, or in what he called old-time Texas terms, just a mean old son of a bitch.
And the evidence against him was strong.
Described as overwhelming, which led to a really unusual trial strategy by the defense.
What did they do?
Bart's lawyer, Randy McDonald, he pretty much conceded guilt right at the start of the trial. Told the jury Bart was absolutely guilty.
Wait, the defense lawyer said that?
Yeah, but he urged them to still make the state prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. It basically shifted the whole fight to the punishment phase. The goal wasn't acquittal, it was just trying to avoid the death penalty.
So key witnesses were the accomplices.
Big time. Adam Hip, the friend who revealed the earlier plot, he testified, got immunity for it. And Stephen Champagne, the getaway driver.
He testified against Bart.
Yes, in exchange for a 15-year sentence. His testimony was crucial.
And their testimony revealed just how long Bart had been planning this.
For years, it wasn't impulsive. They detailed plots going back to 2000. recruiting college roommates for one attempt.
Yeah.
That one failed because of an alarm system.
Okay.
Then the plot with Adam Hipp, first involving burning a lake house, then the ambush plan that was so similar to what actually happened.
And someone else knew. A woman.
Right. Jennifer Japhet, an acquaintance. She apparently found out about a plot back in April 2001. She confronted Bart. He hugged her, whispered something like everything was going to be okay.
Creepy.
Very. And she actually called the police. They notified Kent and Patricia back then.
So the parents had been warned years before. That's just tragic. They couldn't have known how serious it really was.
It seems like they couldn't grasp the reality of it.
Yeah.
And Champagne's testimony at trial, it was pretty chilling.
What did you say?
Confessed to being the getaway driver, confirmed Brashear was the shooter, said Bart offered them a cut of $1 million insurance policy as payment.
And when asked about killing for money...
On cross-examination, his response was just cold. He said, the way I looked at it was they weren't human.
God. Just awful. And Champagne helped police find more evidence.
Yes, that was part of his cooperation. He led them to Lake Conroe, where they dumped stuff. Police recovered a chisel used on the gun safe, ammo matching the murder weapon, and 2 cell phones Bart had provided specifically for the plot. Direct physical links.
Did Bart testify himself?
He did, which is always risky. Under questioning from his own lawyer, McDonald, he denied wanting to hurt anyone now. But then he made this shocking admission.
What was that?
He said, the only people I ever hated were my parents and my brother. But then also claimed his dad had become his best friend. Very contradictory.
And the prosecutor, Felkman, cross-examined him too.
Yeah, Felkman really pushed him on his lack of emotion, his detachment, challenged Bart's claim he never felt loved, pointing out how much his mother seemed to dote on him and Kevin.
Did Felkman suggest he was still dangerous?
He asked if Bart's disconnect meant he could kill again. Bart said no. But Felkman shot back that he had killed his family based on totally false circumstances. Really hammered that point.
So what happened to the others involved? Brashear and Champagne?
Their outcomes were very different from Bart's initial sentence. Chris Brashear, the actual shooter, he took a plea deal. Got a life sentence.
Life, not death.
Right. Life. Stephen Champagne, the driver, got 15 years because he testified. And the friends from the earlier failed plots. They got immunity.
So, after all that, the jury decides Bart's fate?
They deliberated for only about 2 hours, found him guilty of capital murder.
Under the law of parties, what does that mean exactly?
It's a Texas law. Basically means you could be held criminally responsible for what your co-conspirators do during a crime if their actions were part of carrying out the shared plan. Even if you didn't pull the trigger yourself, you're just as guilty.
Got it. And the sentence?
After that quick guilty verdict in the 6-day trial, the jury sentenced Bart Whitaker to death.
But like you said, that wasn't the end of the legal road. The appeals process started.
Right. Went up to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the highest criminal court in the state, and several key legal issues were argued.
One was about those plea negotiations that happened before trial.
Exactly. Bart, through his first lawyer, Dan Cogdell, a big-name attorney, had offered to plead guilty. Take life without parole, maybe even multiple life sentences.
And there was a written admission, a proffer.
Yes, a proffer containing admissions, made with the understanding, the agreement, that if the plea deal didn't happen, the proffer wouldn't be used against him.
But it came up at trial.
Big time. At the punishment phase, Bart's trial lawyer, Randy McDonald, used those rejected plea offers strategically. He argued it showed Bart was willing to accept responsibility, spare his family a trial, implied the state was being unreasonable seeking death, maybe because of issues related to the proffer.
How did the state respond to that?
Prosecutor Felkman pushed back hard, called it legal maneuvering, not real remorse. He said he was actually offended by the tone of the proffer and annoyed to find out Bart hadn't even written it himself.
Did the state use the proffer itself?
Yeah, during cross-examination of Bart. They had him read it silently, then asked if it was true. Bart denied writing it, said the whole thing was confusingly handled.
So how did the appeals court handle this whole proffer issue?
Well, Court of Criminal Appeals acknowledged it was a significant part of Bart's case for mitigation, for trying to get life instead of death.
Oh.
But they ruled that the defense team messed up procedurally. They didn't make the proper legal objection during the trial when the prosecutor started talking about the plea talks. Because they didn't object correctly at the time, the appeals court said the issue was procedurally defaulted, basically waived.
So a legal technicality meant they couldn't rule on the substance of it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the court also said, even if the objection had been made properly, any error would have been harmless.
Why harmless?
Because the evidence of guilt was just so overwhelming. And importantly, since the defense was the one who brought up the plea offers first, trying to use them to help Bart.
They opened the door.
Exactly. The court said the defense opened the door, which allowed the prosecution to then rebut the defense's claims about Bart's remorsefulness regarding those offers.
Okay, what other legal issues came up on appeal? There were some audio tapes.
Yes. Recordings of phone calls. These were calls between Bart and Adam Hipp, the friend who spilled the beans about the earlier plot. The police had Hipp cooperate and recorded the calls before Bart fled to Mexico.
What was on the tapes?
Bart was basically offering Hipp money to keep quiet about that 2001 plot, trying to buy his silence.
And these tapes were played for the jury.
Yep, about 100 pages worth of transcription were admitted during the guilt phase. The defense objected, said it was hearsay, violated Bart's right to confront witnesses.
And on appeal.
His lawyers argued the tapes had all sorts of inadmissible stuff. Mentions of other minor crimes Bart might have committed years ago, like stealing computers, Hipp talking about theories he'd heard, financial details about Kent, even Hipp talking to a lawyer.
How did the court rule on the tapes?
Similar outcome to the proffer issue. The appeals court said the trial objections were too broad, too general. The defense didn't specify which parts of the 100 pages were objectionable.
They didn't point fingers clearly enough?
Right. The court said it wasn't their job to sift through it all, and guess what the defense meant. And again, they ruled any potential error was harmless anyway.
Because the evidence was overwhelming.
Exactly. They concluded the jury would have convicted him and sentenced him to death even without hearing those specific tapes, given everything else.
Were there other constitutional challenges? Things about the death penalty itself?
Yes, a whole host of them. Challenges to the lethal injection drugs Texas used, arguments about the burden of proof for mitigation evidence, whether the jury had to properly consider mitigation, the constitutionality of that law of parties special issue they had to answer.
Standard capital appeal points.
Pretty standard, yeah. And the Court of Criminal Appeals rejected all of them, basically saying they'd ruled on these issues before in other cases and saw no reason to change their precedent.
And wasn't there a separate lawsuit about the lethal injection drug?
Right, Bart and some other death row inmates sued the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. They were challenging the purity of the pentobarbital, the drug used, claimed it wasn't pure, might cause pain, violating the Constitution.
What happened with that lawsuit?
It had a bit of a back and forth legally. Bart was initially kicked out of the suit because he didn't have an execution date set yet. That got appealed. But interestingly, he ended up withdrawing from that appeal shortly before his execution was actually scheduled.
Which brings us to the commutation, the final act. His appeals ran out, death warrant signed.
Yep, warrant signed in November 2017. Execution set for February 22, 2018.
And this is where Kent Whitaker, his father, steps in a really major way.
Incredibly major.
Yeah.
And very unusual. Despite everything Bart did, Kent launched a public campaign to save his son's life.
What did he do?
He wrote a letter, published in the Houston Chronicle, directly asking the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to spare my son. He met personally with the board chairman. Bart's lawyers also submitted an 18-page document arguing for clemency.
And the board's decision.
This was the stunning part. On February 20th, 2018, just 2 days before the scheduled execution, the board voted, unanimously, to recommend commuting Bart's death sentence to life.
Unanimous. In Texas, that's rare.
Extremely rare, especially a recommendation for commutation from death to life.
So the recommendation goes to the governor.
Governor Greg Abbott. And on the very day of the execution, February 22nd, with about 40 minutes left on the clock,
He granted it.
he granted the commutation. It was actually Governor Abbott's first commutation of a death sentence and the first one in Texas since way back in 2007.
Why did he do it? What reasons did he give?
He laid out several factors. First, that unanimous recommendation from the board carried a lot of weight.
Okay.
Second, he pointed to what he called the troubling sentencing disparity. The fact that Brasharamir, the trigger man, got life, while Bart, the mastermind, got death. That bothered him.
That makes sense. The actual killer getting a lesser sentence.
Right. Third, Bart had formally agreed to waive any possibility of parole ever. He'd spend his natural life in prison no matter what.
So guaranteeing he'd never get out.
Exactly. And finally, maybe most powerfully, Governor Abbott cited Kent Whitaker's passionate plea. Kent argued that executing Bart would victimize him all over again, taking his last living immediate family member.
The surviving victim didn't want the execution.
A hugely compelling factor. So the result, Bart's sentence was changed. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. Abbott specifically said Bart must spend the remainder of his life behind bars.
So that's the main legal story. Did the sources mention anything else about Bart's life in prison since then?
A couple of things. He was part of that unsuccessful class action lawsuit about death row conditions, the 23-hour-a-day solitary confinement.
Okay.
And his father, Ken, as you mentioned, wrote that book, Murder by Family, really detailing his journey, the forgiveness aspect, describing forgiving the nameless stranger before realizing it was his own son he needed to forgive.
That's profound. And Bart himself has been writing.
Yeah, quite a bit, actually. He's won some Pitney Prison Writing Contest awards for essays, even a short story. And he wrote a master's thesis while incarcerated, something titled Who Fears Hell Runs Toward It, about the Christian metaphysical foundations of the American prison system.
Wow. An MA thesis from death row, then life row?
Right. There was apparently some discussion or controversy around the sale of that thesis and just generally about the nature and power of writing done by people in prison.
Okay, so wrapping this up, looking back at this whole case through our sources, it's just an incredible story. Calculated betrayal, meticulous deception.
A painstaking investigation, complex legal fights, and then this truly rare commutation, driven so much by the father's forgiveness and that sentencing disparity issue.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about intent, manipulation, how the legal system even tries to handle this level of family violence. And those human elements, justice, accountability, forgiveness. How does the law really grapple with motivations this dark and twisted?
And the sources kind of leave us with this lingering, unsettling question, right? The ultimate why. Why did Bart do it?
Was it just the money, like the prosecution argued?
Or was it something deeper, more psychological, like his father came to believe? The sources suggest we might never definitively know that root cause.
And that ambiguity. It sort of challenges any system, legal or otherwise, to fully understand, let alone prevent, something this extreme. What does it really mean when the deepest motivations stay hidden, even after the courts have spoken and the sentence is being served?
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care and keep your chores company.